Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into what is essentially a masterclass on human biology, looking specifically at how our nightly physiological rhythms are literally the only thing standing between us and absolute neurological collapse. I mean, we are talking about the ultimate biological reset button here. If you've ever wondered what actually separates healthy aging from devastating cognitive decline at the cellular level, well, the answers don't lie in the hours we spend awake. They're actually hidden in the unseen architecture of the time we spend asleep. So let's just jump right into this. 60%. I really want you to wrap your head around that number. 60% is the exact amount by which the interstitial space, that's the fluid-filled gaps between the cells in your brain, physically expands when you enter natural sleep. Your brain is literally altering its macroscopic structure to create this massive, high-pressure channel for fluid to rush through. It's exactly like opening the floodgates on a dam. So right off the bat, we establish that sleep isn't just rest. This is a dramatic, physical transformation of your brain's architecture. Which naturally brings us to a pretty profound question. What if the key to preventing cognitive collapse happens entirely in the dark? You know, we so often think of sleep as this passive state where we're just doing nothing. But at the molecular, the cellular, and the neurological levels, sleep is actually the most intense, highly orchestrated period of active biological maintenance your body ever goes through. All right, part one, the nightly wash cycle. To really understand this from first principles, we've got to look at the glymphatic system. You can think of this as your brain's orchestrated nightly metabolic wash cycle. Technically, it's a brain-wide transport pathway that depends entirely on your glial cells. And what it does is facilitate this massive convective exchange of cerebrospinal fluid and interstitial fluid. Basically, it quite literally washes the metabolic waste out of your brain tissue, flushing out all those toxic byproducts left over from a long day of intense cellular activity. Now here's the catch. This biological wash cycle only turns on during a very specific state, deep, non-rapid eye movement sleep, and specifically periods characterized by slow wave activity. This exact, precise physiological state is absolutely required to flush out highly specific neurotoxins. We're talking about amyloid beta and tau proteins. These are the exact proteins that, if you just leave them there to accumulate, eventually form the plaques and tangles that cause severe neurodegenerative decay like what we see in Alzheimer's disease. Which leads us to part two, when sleep architecture collapses. So what actually happens when this architecture breaks down? It's basically a catastrophic domino effect. Let's say you have obstructive sleep apnea, right? Your airway closes, your oxygen drops, and you briefly wake up. That is step one, sleep fragmentation. Because you're constantly pulled out of that vital deep slow wave sleep, you move right into step two, impaired clearance. The waste isn't draining. With those toxins building up, we hit step three, microglial reactivity. Your brain's immune cells basically freak out, and that directly cascades into step four, which is massive synaptic disruption. Your neurons literally lose their physical ability to communicate efficiently with each other. If we dive a layer deeper into the cellular level, prolonged wakefulness physically alters your brain's entire immune system. That sheer exhaustion triggers what are known as IBUB1 positive microglia, and these are highly pro-inflammatory cells. Now, your brain tries to fight back, releasing anti-inflammatory cytokines to compensate, but honestly, it's just not enough to stop the activation of the NF-kappa B pathway. This essentially forces the brain into a state of severe oxidative stress, and it can even compromise the integrity of the blood-brain barrier itself. Part 3. The ApoE4 genetic multiplier. Now we have to introduce a massive genetic complication, the point where our DNA violently intersects with sleep loss. You've probably heard of the ApoE gene, specifically the ApoE epsilon 4 allele, which is literally the strongest genetic risk factor for late-onset Alzheimer's disease. But what's absolutely fascinating and kind of terrifying in the data is that ApoE4 acts as a devastating multiplier when you combine it with poor sleep architecture. Individuals carrying ApoE4 aren't just more likely to develop dementia, they're actually significantly more prone to severe sleep disturbances like sleep apnea in the first place. When we compare this by looking at actual brain tissue, the physical contrast is wild. In a normal ApoE3 brain, even when it's sleep-deprived, it somehow manages to maintain stable microglial function. But in an ApoE4 brain, sleep deprivation leads to decreased microglial clustering around those toxic plaques. And worse, there's reduced polarization of aquaporin 4. Those are the literal plumbing channels in the brain's astrocytes that allow the glymphatic wash cycle to even work. So an exhausted ApoE4 brain physically loses its mechanical ability to pump waste out.
This dynamic creates what researchers call a bidirectional feed-forward cycle. Basically, the ApoE4 genotype exacerbates sleep disruption, right? Which then accelerates amyloid deposition and the spreading of tau proteins, which structurally damages the brain tissue itself, which in turn causes even more severe sleep disruption. It's just a vicious compounding loop of pathology.
Moving into part 4, microglia and the tipping point. To fully grasp why the brain's immune system ultimately turns against itself, you need to meet TREM2. This is an immunomodulating receptor found on your immune cells, and it is absolutely crucial for identifying and removing pathogenic amyloid beta plaques. Think of it this way. If your glymphatic wash cycle is the brain's plumbing system, TREM2 is the chemical homing beacon telling the immune cells exactly where to go scrub. But sleep loss literally weaponizes this entire system. Unbiased transcriptome and proteome profiling from some incredible recent studies shows that sleep deprivation totally exhausts these TREM2-dependent microglia. Being awake for too long places this massive energy demand on the cells. Their internal recycling plants, which are called lysosomes, suffer severe maturation impairments. This triggers absolute metabolic dyshomeostasis. Essentially, the immune cells run out of gas, fail to clear the plaques, and actually, it's worse than that. They shift from being the protectors of your brain to being the primary instigators of widespread neuroinflammation. So how do we fix it? Part 5, restoring the glymphatic flush. How do we actually stop this neurological collapse? Well, converging data from several landmark clinical trials points squarely to continuous positive airway pressure, or CPAP therapy for sleep apnea. Look at this. In a retrospective cohort of folks with cognitive impairment, strict CPAP adherence resulted in a 2.3-point improvement in objective cognitive scores, like the MoCA and MMSE. That's a massive jump. In trials focusing on subjective cognitive decline, CPAP actually decreased the ratio of toxic amyloid proteins circulating in plasma. And in pilot studies of patients with confirmed Alzheimer's biomarkers, it resulted in significantly slower global cognitive decline. We are seeing real mechanical interventions physically altering the trajectory of a neurodegenerative disease. And why does this matter so much for you? Because fixing your sleep architecture mechanically restores that glymphatic flush. By resolving the lack of oxygen, the hypoxia, and actively consolidating that vital slow-wave deep sleep, patients see highly specific neurological and behavioral benefits. Semantic fluency comes back, immediate memory improves, global decline physically slows down, all because the brain's internal washing machine is finally plugged back in and allowed to run its full cycle uninterrupted. All right, part 6, the pharmacology of deep sleep. Now, mechanical fixes like CPAP aren't the only frontier here. We're currently looking at a totally new, advanced class of pharmacology known as DORAs. That stands for dual orexin receptor antagonists, with drugs like suvorexant. Unlike traditional sedatives, which, let's be honest, just heavily depress the entire central nervous system like a chemical hammer, DORAs work with extreme precision. They specifically target and block the orexin arousal system. Those are the neuropeptides that promote wakefulness. And notably, orexin is very often found to be abnormally elevated in the cerebrospinal fluid of Alzheimer's patients.
The biological trade-off here is just fascinating. By selectively blocking wakefulness rather than forcing the brain into a chemically induced coma, DORAs improve sleep continuity incredibly efficiently. Clinical trials show they consolidate deep sleep without causing that standard, groggy neurodepressant hangover, meaning your morning cognitive performance and your postural stability remain completely intact.
And the molecular potential we're seeing is incredible. Data indicates these compounds can attenuate cognitive impairment, and they even help modulate that exact microglial immune activation we were discussing earlier, operating directly through the BMAL1 and NLRP3 cellular pathways. They've even been shown to decrease biological stress during intense events like opioid withdrawal. However, I want to be 100% clear with you here. While the short-term targeting is absolutely phenomenal, long-term safety and efficacy trials are still ongoing. We still need to fully understand the sustained biological effects of blocking the orexin system over the course of several decades. As we wrap up this biological analysis, I want to leave you with this highly nuanced evolutionary reality pulled directly from the research. It notes that a decreased production of amyloid beta due to reduced neuronal activity is a necessary and critical factor during sleep. So the really crucial takeaway is that sleep isn't just about the glymphatic system magically clearing the waste out. It's also that the sheer act of being asleep literally stops your neurons from producing so much waste in the first place. You have to power down the factory in order to sweep the floors, right? Which brings us to our final thought. The biology we've covered today is crystal clear. Your daytime cognitive output is entirely governed by your nighttime physiological regulation. We've gone through the molecular evidence, those crazy genetic multipliers, and the cellular consequences of getting it wrong. So I have to ask you, are you actively protecting your neurological trajectory, or are you just letting it collapse in the dark? Take this knowledge, optimize your sleep architecture, and protect your brain. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep optimizing, and I'll catch you in the next one.